Today's video was suggested by Angela Sains and Johnny Hill. If you have a missing persons case you'd like to see animated, let us know in the comments of this video, even if you've already commented your request on another video. Saturday, October 2nd, 1999, was a beautiful day in Roosevelt National Forest, Colorado. A Christian singles group was visiting the Padre River Resort, owned by Alan and his twin brother Arlen. They agreed to help the brothers prepare the resort for winter in exchange for lodging. Alan had 2 children, a 6-year-old daughter named Jocelyn, and a 3-year-old son named Jaryd. But he was divorced from their mother and was himself a member of the Christian singles group. The morning of October 2nd, 11 members of the Christian singles group were going to see a nearby trout farm, roughly 2 miles from the resort. Jocelyn wanted to go with them. Alan knew a few of the 11 pretty well, so he agreed. When Jaryd saw his sister was going, he wanted to go too. Alan wasn't immediately comfortable with Jaryd going. After all, looking after a 3-year-old is very different from looking after a 6-year-old. But he did just allow his daughter to go, and the trout hatchery was right up the road. So he allowed Jaryd to join them. Not long after, the Christian group decided to take a late morning hike up the Big South Trail, 15 miles west of the resort. But they still had Jocelyn and Jaryd. The Big South Trail is considered a moderate trail to hike. It's 11 miles long, and in addition to the rock fields and the ups and downs, there were areas where the path would be no more than 2 feet wide, where if you slipped off one side, it was all loose shale down to the river. It wasn't a hike for children, but if you were holding the child's hand, there weren't any obstacles they wouldn't be able to make it through. The group parked at the trailhead and started hiking. An 11-mile trail would take on average between 3 and 7.5 hours to hike, depending on the hiker's skill level. With the group this size, and with points on the trail that are only 2 feet wide, it's not uncommon for a group to divide into subgroups. One of the adults was holding the hands of Jaryd and his sister Jocelyn. It's not clear if they were the fastest group, or somewhere in the middle. But 1.5 miles into the trail, the groups were spread pretty far apart. That's where Jaryd met 2 men fishing. Jaryd asked the men if they were aware of any bears in the area. The men weren't worried about bear, and Jaryd went on his way. Even though Jaryd was apart from the group, the fishermen say they could see his group between 50 and 80 feet behind him in one direction, as he carried on in the other. It is believed that the fishermen were the last people to see Jaryd alive. It was approximately 11:30. About 45 minutes later, the group realizes Jaryd is missing. The group spent around an hour searching for him. 2 members of the Christian singles group went back to the resort to tell Alan. Alan immediately ran to his car and asked where they were going. When he heard they went 15 miles away, he was shocked. He didn't expect them to be that far from the resort, because when Jaryd asked if he could go, the plan was to see the local hatchery. Alan arrived at the trail and took off, hoping he would be able to outpace Jaryd and catch up with him. He met up with the group and asked if anyone had seen or heard anything. Some members of the group reported hearing a scream, including his daughter, Jocelyn. Alan asked his daughter what the scream sounded like, if it was fearful or playful. Jocelyn said it was a playful scream, like one let out during a game of tag. The trail was only 11 miles long, but the woods surrounding it are over 1,000 square miles. Alan realized this was not the sort of thing he could do on his own. If Jaryd was on the trail, one member of the group should have caught up to him. Something was wrong. Alan raced back to the trailhead and reached out to the resort manager, instructing them to call 911. the resort manager already had. It was about 4 o'clock. Just shy of 4:30, an emergency pager alert was sent to Larimer County Emergency Services Specialist and Larimer County Undersheriff Bill Nelson, who goes out and verifies search and rescue is needed. After verifying, Bill Nelson pages Larimer County Search and Rescue Manager George Jansen. By 6:30 p.m., search and rescue personnel are at both the upper and lower trailheads and start working their way towards the center. There were over 60 search and rescue members searching the Big South Trail. Jaryd had been missing now for 6 hours. The two search and rescue teams met up with each other in the middle of the trail at approximately 8 p.m., without either group finding any sign of Jaryd. If Jaryd was on the trail, he would have been found. The search parameters were expanded and more services were ordered, including an Air Force helicopter that would serve to both cover more ground and help to identify additional search locations for ground searchers. The next morning, search and rescue was extra vigilant as they were told Jaryd would wake up around dawn. If he was hiding and fell asleep the night before, he might wake up and start crying because he was lost or scared. The military helicopter aiding in the search and rescue effort needed to fuel up, so it went to Fort Collins Loveland Municipal Airport. There were 5 people aboard the helicopter, 4 airmen, including 1 doctor, and Mark Sheets, a Larimer County search and rescue member. Search and rescue manager George Jansen was supposed to be on the flight, but was relieved by Mark Sheets. After fueling up, the helicopter team returned, but contending with mountain conditions proved to be more difficult than anticipated. Instead of wearing a helmet, Mark wore a radio on his head to allow him to communicate with the pilot. He sat on the floor looking out of the open helicopter door, looking for Jaryd, or places search and rescue should direct their attention. But Mark noticed they were too low. Mark radioed the pilot. "We need altitude." Sadly, the pilot was already aware, but unable to gain any. The reply came back, "I know. I can't. We're going in." Mark understood that to mean they were going to crash. Quickly as he could, he attempted to close the door as they were descending, but was unable to. The helicopter blades ripped into the treetops, sending pieces of helicopter and tree in all directions. Before Mark could get the door closed, a severed tree limb came through, striking the Air Force doctor in the head. The helicopter stalled 100 feet in the air and crashed. The 4 airmen were able to get out, but Mark Sheets was trapped inside, unconscious. Members of search and rescue kicked in one of the helicopter's windows and pulled Mark out. All of the 5 men on board survived, but 2 of them had significant injuries. The doctor suffered a fractured eye socket from being struck by the severed tree limb. Mark suffered a concussion, had a serious cut on his leg, exposing his femur bone, 3 broken vertebrae, and a broken shoulder. 3 of them had to be taken to the hospital via air ambulance. The next day of the search, both a plane and an additional helicopter were employed to help the search from above. But the helicopter could not perform its search duty safely and was called off. On the ground, over 200 trained searchers, a dozen dog teams, and a dive team searched for days without finding one solid clue. The story went national. There were new satellite vans lining the road. Some media exposure can have a positive effect when trying to find a missing child, but in Jaryd's case, it appears to have had the opposite effect. It was just really easy to report how poorly things were going. The Air Force helicopter was far from the only accident. Ground searchers and divers were also getting injured and being sent off for medical care. The local sheriff's office was not prepared to field the barrage of phone calls that would come in. There were hundreds, maybe thousands of civilians that wanted to help the search and rescue effort. Tips and sightings were being called in constantly, putting Jaryd in any number of states coast to coast. psychics were calling, claiming they knew where little Jaryd was. This, coupled with the search being a 24-hour-a-day endeavor, with some searchers going out and calling at night hoping Jaryd would hear them and answer, was too much. Bill spoke with Alan. With the mounting injuries, no clues, and the media creating this whirlwind of calls, they agreed to end the professional search and rescue efforts. On October 8th at 7 p.m., the search for Jaryd was officially ended. Then, in June 2003, over 3.5 years after Jaryd's disappearance, a clue was found. Businessmen and hiking partners Gary Watts and Rob Osborne were hiking the Big South Trail. The two were experienced hikers and enjoyed going off trail from time to time to explore portions of the wilderness that don't get to be enjoyed by many. The two made it to a rock field. The rock field would demand someone's full attention to navigate because every step needed to be intentional, or you could easily slip and get injured. While navigating the rock field, the two decided to hike up the ridge. That's where they found Jaryd's clothing. The two were familiar with Jaryd's case. They took pictures of the area, grabbed some of the clothing, and took them to the Larimer County Sheriff's Office. The pictures were then emailed to Alan, who confirmed they were Jaryd's clothes. The next day, Alan, the Sheriff's Department, NecroSearch, and personnel from Child Protective Network searched for Jaryd's remains where his clothing was found. By 11:30 a.m., a skull fragment and tooth were found within 200 feet of where Jaryd's clothing was found. Jaryd's clothing and remains were found nearly 600 feet higher than where he was last seen. It was not an easy place to get to. It would not be a place ground searchers would go because of how unlikely it would be for Jaryd to, by himself, climb the hundreds of feet to make it to the ridge. However, Bill remembers the search dogs alerting at the ridge. If the dogs alert somewhere, the area is usually thoroughly searched. It's also the sort of place that would have been given a visual search at minimum, and possibly cataloged to be searched by ground searchers by the helicopter if it hadn't gone down. It is impossible to say what would have happened or really give any accurate account of what should have been years ago. But the finding of Jaryd's clothing presented a completely different set of anomalies. Jaryd's clothing appeared to weather at different rates. His shoes looked fresh, like they had just been taken off. His jacket had a few small holes in it, like maybe a small animal was curious about it. And his pants were tattered, like birds were using it to build their nest. Just hearing this, you might assume that he was the victim of some wild animal attack. If his pants' legs were tattered, how do we know something didn't grab his leg? This appears to be the theory that law enforcement is most comfortable with, and at first glance, it appears plausible. Jaryd was so small, many people have confidently said it would have been impossible for him to get up to the ridge by himself, but a mountain lion would be able to carry him up without a problem. But none of his clothes were bloody, and what mountain lion would bite through his leg, but not his torso? All of his clothes should have been shredded and bloody. Some claim his clothes came off before the mountain lion got him, keeping them clean. But if the mountain lion is what carried him up the ridge, his clothes would have needed to come off on the trail, where they would have definitely been found. DNA tests have confirmed the portion of skull was in fact Jaryd's, but that appears to be the only answer we have regarding the case. Over 2 decades later, some questions have been answered, and others have become more mysterious. We are going to be reading the comments to see what missing persons case to animate next. Make sure to comment the stories you'd want to see the most. If you'd like to see more animated retellings, I recommend the case of the NYPD cannibal cop, available exclusively on YouTube channel Super Horror Show.